Hey there, and welcome back to the Evo Femme Tales audiobook experience, where ambition looks incredible in a pencil skirt. Ever wondered what it would take to crack the corporate glass ceiling when the system just isn't built for you? What if the smartest move you could make wasn't working harder, networking better, or playing the long game, but simply becoming someone the game was actually designed for? Today, we're diving into the shape of ambition. It's the story of Marcus, a sharp, methodical consultant who's been doing everything right for 3 years and watching the promotions go everywhere but his direction. So he does the only logical thing a brilliant shapeshifter can do. He builds the perfect candidate from scratch, gets her hired at his own firm, and executes the most elaborate professional con in Sydney's CBD. The plan is airtight, the logic is clean, the math absolutely checks out. There's just one problem. Mara is very good at her job, and she's starting to make friends. And there's a certain sharp-eyed client across the table who keeps catching her eye at exactly the wrong moments. And the body Marcus built to be a temporary tool has developed opinions. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Chapter 1. But if you're already intrigued and want to know just how far this slow-burn identity unraveling goes, and trust me, it goes far, you don't have to wait for the weekly uploads. The complete story is available right now, completely free, over on our Patreon. Links are in the description below. But for now, let's check the announcement board. It updated at 7:18 a.m., and the math is about to change everything. Enjoy the tale. Chapter 1, The Math. The announcement board updated at 7:18 a.m., and Marcus didn't have to get up to read it. Congratulations to Sarah NG on her promotion to senior consultant, effective 2 June. He read it twice. The second time was not because he'd missed something, it was because he was the kind of person who confirmed data before filing it. He finished his coffee, the office stuff, which tasted like hot disappointment filtered through a machine that hadn't been descaled since the Rudd government, and set the cup down and looked at the name for another moment. Sarah NG? Fine. She was good. He'd worked alongside her on the Carrington restructure, and she hadn't put a foot wrong, which was more than he could say for most people on that floor. This wasn't about Sarah NG. He did the maths. Not metaphorical math, actual math, the kind he did when a problem needed to be understood rather than felt about. 3 years at analyst level at Axiom Strategic Consulting, Sydney CBD. 2 promotion cycles, both passed. The last 4 senior consultant promotions across the Sydney office. Sarah NG, Michelle Park, Asha Davy, and Graham Tull, who had been at the firm for 9 years and whose sister-in-law was the managing partner, which Marcus felt said everything about that particular data point. 3 women and 1 legacy admission. The current partner bonus structures had diversity metrics baked in. He knew this because he read the documentation that most people at his level didn't bother to read, and because he'd had a half-conversation with David Lim in finance at the Christmas drinks last year that had confirmed what the documentation implied. The firm was in a very specific window: federal reporting season, 2 government contracts under review, a PR strategy that had been quietly running for 18 months built around female leadership optics. It wasn't sinister. It was just structural. A set of incentives producing a set of outcomes, the same way water found drains. Marcus was not angry about this. Anger would require believing it was personal, and it wasn't. He was a variable the current equation didn't favor. He was also, and this was the part that the math kept returning to, a shapeshifter. He got up, rinsed his mug, and went downstairs to get a real coffee. The place 2 blocks over was called Criteria, which Marcus had always thought was a stupid name for a cafe, but which made consistently good espresso, so he'd made his peace with it. The girl behind the bar, Priya, he knew from 18 months of morning transactions, had his order started before he reached the counter. "Early one," she said, without looking up from the portafilter. "Not especially, just avoiding the office machine." "It's been broken for 3 weeks, hasn't it?" "It wasn't broken before that, it was just bad." She laughed. He paid. He took his coffee to the window ledge that ran along the front of the shop and stood there while the CBD woke up around him, the street filling with the particular density of 8 a.m. on a Monday. Everyone moving with that specific Monday gait, purposeful and slightly grim, the whole city performing the fiction that it had fully recovered from the weekend. He thought about Mara. Not in a complicated way, practically. He had two forms he used with any regularity. Marcus, this one the default, the one his Medicare card was under and his landlord had met, and his flatmate had known since they were 19. And Mara, which he'd built at 22 out of curiosity and mild amusement, and had used twice since for reasons that he'd found interesting at the time and hadn't particularly examined since. She had a shell LinkedIn he'd set up years ago, a phone number tied to a SIM he'd kept live. A name that rhymed with his, that was deliberate, back when he'd thought it was funny. He'd thought about the idea before. Not seriously. Amusedly, the way you think about a chess move you can see on the board but haven't committed to, the board had shifted. He ran the risk surface while he waited for the espresso to cool enough to drink. The firm didn't do metamorph background checks. That was illegal in NSW under the Genetic Privacy Act, same as asking about any other heritable trait. His ability wasn't on any professional record. His shifts as Mara had been private. There was no documented connection between Marcus Vale and Mara Vale except the name, which was already there by design. Downside, if discovered, he resigns. His career at Axiom is exactly as stalled as it is right now. Upside, he stops being stalled. He finished the coffee. He went back to the office. He didn't say anything to anyone about any of it because he never did. He heard from Callum before he got home, a text that said pizza. Yes or no, I need to call it in, and replied yes without breaking stride. The flat was in Surrey Hills, 20 minutes by tube from the CBD, and Marcus had lived there for 2 years with Callum in an arrangement that suited both of them. They were genuinely friends, they both kept reasonable hours, and neither of them required the other to be emotionally available at short notice. Callum was on the couch when Marcus got in, laptop open, something on the TV that wasn't quite being watched. He had the particular aura of someone who had done just enough work to feel okay about the pizza. Good day. Fine, Marcus said, and it was true the way most things he said were true, accurate to what he'd actually experienced, edited for what was relevant to share. He dropped his bag, changed his shirt, came out and sat in the armchair that was technically Callum's armchair, but had been ceded to Marcus through some process of natural selection that neither of them had formally acknowledged. They announced the thing, Callum said. He'd mentioned it, not as a grievance, just factually, at some point in the past month, the way you'd mention any logistical development. There's a promotion cycle coming up. I'm probably in the conversation. Yeah. And Sarah and G. Callum made a face. Not dramatic, just a brief rearrangement of his features that communicated sympathy without requiring Marcus to perform being upset about it. It was one of the things Marcus had always appreciated about him. She good. Very. Right, he looked back at the TV. So you got done by someone who was actually better than you, not just someone they picked because of metrics. Partially. Callum pulled a piece of pizza from the box he'd already had delivered. Marcus hadn't registered the boxes on the counter until just now, which meant he'd been more interior than he'd realized, and pointed it in Marcus's direction. Which part? She's good, the metrics also exist. Yeah, he chewed. That's worse, isn't it, when it's both? Somewhat. They watched something for a while. Marcus ate 2 slices and drank most of a beer and was present enough to laugh at the right moments. He was also thinking about Meridian Advisory, which was a real Melbourne consulting firm with about 400 employees, large enough that reference checks went to a central HR inbox that was managed by a contractor who'd never met most of the people whose names came through it. He'd look them up on his phone in the tube, just to confirm they existed in the right way. They did. By 10:30, he was in his room with his laptop, and the door closed and the problem in front of him like a clean sheet of paper. He opened the LinkedIn. Mara Vale, as she currently existed online, was a ghost, a profile photo taken 18 months ago out of curiosity, a headline that said Strategic Consulting Melbourne because he'd put something in to avoid a blank and nothing else. 4 connections. One of them was a person he genuinely knew. The other 3 were automated follows from back when he'd created the account and clicked on the suggested people. He started building. Work history first. He constructed Mara's 4 years at Meridian Advisory with the same methodical care he applied to client deliverables. Not so impressive that it would invite heavy scrutiny, not so forgettable that she'd fail a basic credibility check. He gave her the Carrington restructure, redressed, because he knew that project well enough to describe it from any angle, and because he was fairly confident no one at Axiom would think to cross-reference. He gave her 2 mid-tier project leads and 1 award nomination she hadn't won, because winners were memorable and he wanted her to be good, not famous. The move to Sydney, personal reasons, 18 months ago. He wrote relocated to Sydney for family in the summary section, which was vague enough to be kind and specific enough to be credible. Freelancing in the Gap, 2 short engagements he described in outline without naming the clients, which was standard practice for anyone doing confidential advisory work and would raise no flags. References, he had 2. The first was Jamie Ackhaffer, who had been a colleague 3 jobs ago and who owed Marcus a favor significant enough that he'd stated, explicitly, that he would do whatever Marcus needed without requiring details. Jamie was warm, articulate, and smart enough to know the difference between lying and playing a role. He'd call him tomorrow. The second was a LinkedIn connection, a woman named Christine Lau who he'd met at an industry event 4 years ago and exchanged maybe 6 messages with since, all of them pleasant. He'd email her as Mara. I know this is coming from nowhere, but I've been a quiet admirer of your work for a while and I'm back in the industry after some time off. Would you be comfortable being a reference? It would land as flattering. She'd say yes. He opened the Axiom careers page. 2 analyst positions open. He'd known this. He'd checked before he'd gone to get his Monday morning coffee, which meant he'd been closer to the decision than he'd admitted to himself at the time. He read the listings properly now. They wanted someone with 3 to 5 years of consulting experience, strong quantitative skills, and he read this line twice: demonstrated success in client-facing environments with a particular interest in candidates from underrepresented backgrounds. He sat with that for a moment, then he wrote Mara's cover letter. It was good. He knew it was good because he'd written enough of these to understand what the form required, and because he found it, if he was being honest, slightly easier to write as her than it had ever been to write as himself. Marcus's cover letters were accurate. Mara's had a quality he was struggling to name, something warmer, more direct, less like a document proving qualifications, and more like a person explaining why they actually wanted the thing. He reviewed it for 20 minutes, made 3 adjustments, sent it. Closed the laptop. From the lounge, he could hear Callum watching something else, the TV a low murmur through the wall, punctuated occasionally by a laugh. Marcus lay back on his bed and looked at the ceiling for a while. The overhead light was slightly harsh. He'd been meaning to change the bulb for 6 months. He never got around to it. He thought about Callum's question, so you got done by someone who was actually better than you. The thing was, that wasn't entirely true, and he knew it. He'd been in that office for 3 years. He was good at the job, not adequate good, the kind of good that showed up consistently in output rather than in performance. He'd carried the Carrington restructure. He'd turned the Hennessy report around in 4 days when the original analyst had gone sick and the deadline hadn't moved. He'd been patient, he'd been precise, he'd been present. And then he'd watched the promotion go somewhere else. He wasn't wrong about the math. The metrics existed, the incentives were real, and he had an option most people didn't. He thought about the risk surface one more time, running it cleanly. Worst case, he resigns. Current case, he stagnates. The gap between those outcomes was not as significant as the gap between both of them and the best case. The application was in. He'd hear by Wednesday at the latest. He turned off the light and went asleep. He heard on Tuesday afternoon. The email came at 2:47 p.m. He remembered the time because he was in a meeting that was running long and his phone buzzed on the table in front of him, and he turned it face down and then spent the rest of the meeting not quite listening. The subject line was visible for about half a second. Ray, application, analyst II, strategic consulting. He read it in the lift going down. They wanted to schedule a phone screen. Thursday, if possible. The hiring contact was someone named Jordan Reyes. Mara replied from her phone, which he pulled from his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying both phones for so long it had stopped feeling strange, and confirmed Thursday at 10 a.m. Polite, unhurried. slightly warmer than Marcus's professional emails usually ran. He stood on the pavement outside the office building in the yellow afternoon and read the exchange back. Mara wrote differently than he did. He hadn't planned that. It had just happened. He put the phone back in his pocket and went to get a coffee and thought about that for the 4 minutes it took to walk to Criteria. The flat was empty when he got home Tuesday evening. Callum had texted at 5 to say he'd be out dinner with people from his department, probably going to be a late one. Marcus made pasta, ate it standing at the kitchen bench reading something on his laptop, and then cleaned up and sat on the couch for a while and didn't put the TV on. He shifted at 10:30 p.m. He went to the bathroom first, which he always did. He wasn't sure why, some combination of good lighting and the counter to hold onto if his balance went during the hip phase. He undressed and folded his clothes on the edge of the bath, which was compulsive, and he knew it was compulsive and he did it anyway. He stood in front of the mirror. His face looked back at him. Familiar. Slightly tired, he'd been sleeping reasonably, but the working week had a way of accumulating behind the eyes before it accumulated anywhere else. He gave himself a moment. He always did. Not reverence, not ceremony, just acknowledgement. The thing about to happen was real, and he'd learned young that treating it as nothing was its own kind of mistake. Then he started. It began in the torso. It always did. The rib cage went first, a slow, internal compression, even on both sides, like someone carefully reducing the diameter of something that had more room than it needed. He breathed through it. Long breath in, let it settle, long breath out. The ribcage phase was the one most people imagined would be the hardest, and it wasn't, but it rewarded patience. Breathing against it added minutes he didn't need to add. His hands went to the counter, cool tile under his palms, he kept them there. The hips were next, and this was the part that still landed strangely after 15 years, not because it hurt, but because it was the most structural change, the most fundamental redistribution, and the body seemed to understand this, seemed to treat it with the gravity the moment required. A slow pressure from the inside, lateral and even, the pelvis widening around a different architecture. His weight shifted. His balance recalibrated without his permission. He let it. He dropped 4 centimeters over the next minute, or rather, the floor came 4 centimeters closer, the ceiling lifted proportionally, and his perception of the room adjusted without drama. He'd stopped finding this disorienting when he was about 16. Now it was just a number. He knew it intellectually, filed it, moved on. The musculature redistributed. This part took the longest, the body moving mass with a kind of quiet efficiency, upper body narrowing, shoulders pulling back and in, the mass settling outward and down into the hips and thighs. He felt his grip on the counter change, the same pressure, the same intent, but a different hand geometry, narrower fingers, the knuckles resettling as the bones adjusted. He flexed once against the tile. They felt slightly foreign for the first few minutes. They always did. He didn't watch the chest. He'd stopped watching it years ago, not because it bothered him, but because watching it didn't add anything. He knew the outcome, the design was consistent, there was nothing to monitor. He felt the pressure build and resolve, slow and specific, and then the weight was there, familiar in the abstract, slightly foreign in the immediate way that anything worn briefly and put down and picked up again was slightly foreign. His face last, it always went last. The jaw first, a softening, the angles smoothing into something that read differently from across a room. The brow, the nose, Mara's nose was his nose, just resolved somehow, more definite, which he'd always found slightly funny, the mouth settling into a shape he could describe if pressed but had never needed to. His eyes didn't change color. Hazel, always, same eyes, she just wore them differently. And then she was there. He looked at her for a moment. Mara's hair was dark and jaw-length, grown out of the shift the way it always did, the same color and texture as his. He had no idea how that worked biologically. He'd stopped asking at 19 when the answer turned out to be we don't entirely know and had decided that was fine. She was wearing his t-shirt, which was large on her and faintly absurd. She looked like someone who had gotten home from a long day and hadn't yet changed, which was, in a sense, accurate. She looked like herself. He studied her face for a few seconds with the same quality of attention he applied to a project before signing off on it, checking for anything that wasn't right, anything that needed adjustment. Nothing did. She was consistent. She was well designed. She was standing in a bathroom in Surrey Hills at 10:45 on a Tuesday night looking back at him with an expression that was, he realized, exactly as calm as his own. The phone screen was Thursday at 10. He looked at her for one more moment. You're going to be good at this, he thought, and wasn't sure which of them he was addressing. Then he turned off the light, the harsh overhead one he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months and never had, and shifted back in the dark. Slower than usual, not because anything had gone wrong, but because there was no urgency, the flat was quiet, Callum wouldn't be home for hours. He went to bed. He lay there in the dark for a while before he slept, listening to the street outside, the particular sound of Surrey Hills on a Tuesday, irregular and human, and entirely indifferent to his plans. And felt, with a quiet precision he recognized as his own particular version of satisfaction, that the problem had been addressed. The math made sense. For now, that was enough. And that's a wrap on Chapter 1 of The Shape of Ambition. Marcus has submitted the application. The plan is live. And Mara Vale, 4 connections on LinkedIn, a Shell work history, and a name that rhymes on purpose, is about to walk into a building her other half has worked in for 3 years and be absolutely, perfectly nobody. What could go wrong? If you need to know the answer to that right now, and honestly, you do, because this story does not go where you expect, the complete uncut story is waiting for you over on our Patreon, completely free. Just hit the links in the description below and binge the whole thing. While you're down there, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment. I want to know, would you build a second identity to crack the system? And more importantly, do you think you could pull it off without the second identity pulling *U? Thanks for tuning in to Evo Femtales. Until next time, keep your heels steady and your LinkedIn fresh. See ya!